Welcome to Transcendence Talks podcast with your host, licensed professional counselor, Kristy Crabtree. Join us as we build the bridge between psychology and spirituality and discuss psychology for the soul.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Transcendence Talks podcast. I'm here today with my friend Melissa-Sue Methven. She's an earth angel. I didn't know that when I met her. I didn't know that she hid her wings somewhere, but I know that now. But Melissa is a fellow author with Joan of Arc Publishing. She's the author of The Truth Behind the Smiles, and she's a speaker, and she's a breathwork facilitator. And I'm so excited to have her on. Welcome, Melissa.
Kristy, I'm so honored, and I've been really excited to, join you on the podcast. I still remember actually you showing up for my book launch party too. That's the first time I had met you, and I was like, wow, somebody I don't know, and that's always really exciting, and I felt really honored.
Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh, that was such a synchronistic day. It seriously, your book launch signing changed the trajectory of the rest of my life. It seriously did. I met Kira that day, and that was a day that everything just made sense for me to go write my book. And it was so fun to just see you shine up there. And I was like, oh my gosh, look where she is. That's incredible. To watch you holding something that was here, that was made tangible was so inspiring to me that day. So thank you for that.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it was all surreal because really I did it in August of 2024. And I had gone on the writing adventure with Kira in January of 2024. And it got published in June. So my life just changed so rapidly in that 1 year.
It does do that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's crazy. Oh my gosh. Well, I'd love to share. You have such a poignant story. And I feel like we relate so much through our stories. Even though, suicide isn't a part of my story, repression absolutely is. And it's probably the most common theme that I see in my psychotherapy couch. And so I'd love just to give you the floor and let you share your story.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, in my book, The Truth Behind the Smiles is really a story of my life and my husband, Scott Methven. He died by suicide in March 2022, leaving myself and my two young children. They were 6 and 8 at the time. And I just started going back, you kind of revisit how did we get to this point? And I started diving into my own healing and really getting curious as to how some got out of the darkness or their depression and started reading books, listening to podcasts, my own therapies and my kids. So really getting really curious and trying whatever I could to kind of our healing. And so I noticed that suppression, while I did inner child work and parts work with my counselor, I noticed that from a young girl, I started kind of suppressing my emotions. I was taught don't cry because that was really uncomfortable for the people around me. So I said I didn't want to disappoint them. I was such a people pleaser. If you ask any of my family member, I was just really shy, really quiet, but smiled all the time. If I would cry, I'd hide in the bathroom and then come back with a smile. It just felt like a burden. So that's where that pattern kind of started from a young age. But unfortunately, that just kind of propelled in my relationship. Once I got married with Scott, I met him, I was 23. I just continued hiding the emotions. It felt uncomfortable to speak up.
Yeah.
And having boundaries. So that's kind of what showed up in my marriage. And that didn't allow me.
Can I ask you something about that?
Yeah,
It's just,
course.
I'm super curious about this because I know, and you can speak to as much or little of this as you feel comfortable, but I know at least for me, what was so interesting, because I grew up a people pleaser too, because for me, it was unsafe to show emotions. I would get in trouble. And I also was one that didn't want to disappoint or be in trouble. And so, you preserve that relationship with your parents at the cost of yourself, right? We have to self-betray to preserve the relationship that gives us safety, our food, the roof over our head. We have to.
Yes.
And what I noticed for me was I would then choose relationships where some of the same patterns, the same traits would show up in my partner. And what I've noticed is it seems like as people pleasers, and I'll say I have the same traits, right? That every day I have to be so intentional to overcome those things and really sit back. And I ask myself every day before I make a commitment to somebody else, am I inspired or am I obligated? Because if it's due to your obligation, that's an old pattern. But if I'm inspired, that means in my spirit, that's a yes. And my spirit doesn't lie. My head does. So it's a constant battle for me. But what I'm wondering for you is like, did the patterns in your marriage reflect the same patterns in your childhood? You know, did you see the same traits in your husband as you did?
Oh my gosh. I said I married my dad.
Okay, yeah.
That's kind of what I said. I mean, my dad is still around, lives in Montreal, and I love him, love him. But when he had me, when he was young, he was not at a place emotionally available. He was, involved in drugs. He had been in jail. So emotionally he was not available. So I always yearned for his love, but he couldn't love himself, so he couldn't give that love to me.
Yes, they have unhealed trauma.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And he did. I mean, he really did. From a young boy, his dad having some mental health issues and been taken out of the house and being that very traumatic. And I think he was scared this would happen to him in his early 20s. So there was so much fear there. And with Scott, same thing. I still remember when I first met him, I felt like even though he was 6'4", great, big, handsome guy, there was this young boy inside that just wanted to be loved. And there was this hurt, right? Even though he seemed confident, there was not there and couldn't love himself. So the same thing, he couldn't love me. I kept on like showering with so much love and yearning that back from him. So yes, it was the same pattern that I chose as well, because I had never worked through my childhood relationship with my dad. So that I ended up choosing a similar man.
And let's pause right here too, because oh my gosh. So it's interesting. I've been on this kick with accountability lately. I think I even talked about it in my last podcast, but it's like I was also young, getting into relationships and things like that. And what I realized was I was never accountable for my part before I had healed my trauma. And my part was I couldn't communicate honestly. I couldn't share if I felt hurt or if I felt lonely, if somebody would withdraw. I couldn't share like, hey, that hurt my feelings, or why are you talking to me this way? And I realized looking back, it's like, had I done that, some of the relationships I had been in before I was married wouldn't have lasted had I been healed, because they would have escalated. But I was so afraid of that escalation that I would do everything I could just to keep the peace and to make it pretty and like own all the responsibility of both parts. And it's interesting, because especially with addiction, that people pleasing turns into codependency a lot of times, where we don't speak our truth. We don't call it as we see it. And sometimes we don't even recognize reality when it's in front of us because we get so good at suppressing it.
Oh, I did that. That is 100% me. I couldn't, if I would have spoken up, I don't know if we would have lasted that long. I wouldn't have had these boundaries with my husband. And from early on, it probably wouldn't have worked. But because I'm I got to stay and people pleaser and my own self-confidence, and everybody else really liked him. But there was something definitely there was, these red flags is what they call them, for me, but I'm all accountable for that. I didn't have created those boundaries. I decided to stay and made all those decisions, and I just hid our truth, because it was so hard. I still remember this time I just had Sophia, and 2 weeks after I had her, Scott couldn't get out of bed. He had back pain, but that day he just couldn't get up. And he, him being a dentist, he's got a lot of doctor friends, and they get all the prescriptions that he wants from 2 different doctors. And he was drinking at the same time. I mean, he wasn't working for months. And here I am holding this new baby. And I was just in pure joy of being a mom. I always wanted to be a mom, that I didn't even want to see the reality that I was in at this point, driving him to appointments and him drinking with the opioids and the numbing. And it was just so overwhelming. I remember calling one doctor and telling them, do you know he's getting prescription from somebody else as well? This is not going well. I mean, there was times that I would see it and call it out to be so with my husband, but it just, he always made it seem like he was in control, like, and we both didn't want to see our truth. I mean, for my husband being a dentist, he started back pain early on being a dentist, and, the pressures of keeping an office running, the only way he could do that was by taking these medications and not taking care of himself. So it just and he lost control of those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it became this numbing and coping mechanism. As more challenges arise, he just numb more. It became, from the last few years, it was an everyday drinking thing. It was I had taken pictures of all the pharmaceuticals, and I think there was like a variety of 10 of them, and I started counting, and it was, and I was holding all of that alone. I mean, there's very few people that knew the extent, because I felt, well, we could probably do this on our own. I'm guiding him, giving him some counselors that he can go to, maybe even go to a rehab center where it's only 6 people with other doctors. But never did he say, oh no, I am depressed, or I do have an issue. So, there was always this fear when it came to therapy. And I don't know, it's probably family history. He had family history of bipolar. Both grandparents on both sides died by suicide. There's mental health. So maybe he was scared of a diagnosis of some sort. And then what happens to his license and things like that. So sometimes I kind of wonder about that.
Gosh, yes, there is so much fear in that. I mean, I remember working at a treatment center, and they have programs like for nurses, right? Like Can Do or monitoring, where if a nurse self-reports that they're struggling with addiction, there's these programs, but there's a stigma still, and there's still like some punitive actions that are taken. And I think, the hallmark of addiction is denial. And so one of the defining DSM criteria for addictive disorders is you don't think you have one. It's like addicts like to create this box of like, well, I'm an addict and they'll make a picture of what an addict is in their mind and then like put themselves outside of it to justify. And so I think there's so many barriers to treatment, especially for professionals. Like you said, fear of losing the license, right? Because now you put yourself under a microscope voluntarily, and then your family's whole livelihood is at risk. And there's so much shame underlying addiction that would only add to it. And it breaks my heart that there's so many barriers for professionals getting the help that they so desperately need. And when I worked at Banner, I remember they always said that the most insidious type of addiction is what they would call the high bottom addict or alcoholic. Because when you're living under a bridge in South Phoenix, you know that it's time to get some help and you're desperate and you're ready. But when you're a dentist and you have a high profile career and a beautiful family and the whole thing, it's really easy, again, to justify, I'm fine. I wouldn't be making this kind of money if I wasn't okay. I wouldn't be able to support my family like this if I wasn't okay. And so that is absolutely the most insidious kind.
Yeah, I mean, that's the truth. He was very functioning. We're still, working and going to dental conferences. We're going to family events, even though I could really see it at home. And so it was almost confusing. Like some days I'm like, oh yeah, there's a lot of hope,
Mm-hmm.
He'll be present with me and the kids, but then there's 2-3 days of just never getting up, and it's really low and it's scary and you're not sure what to do. And so, yeah, he was very much, even from the day before, we were snorkeling in Lanai, Hawaii, and having a barbecue with friends. I mean, there was so much hope. And then he looked, there's happiness. I feel like he's like, oh, when we'll go home, we'll read books about a relationship. Because for him, he always said, we'll work on our marriage. But I was like, well, let's work on you, each other individually, but he would never, even when he mentioned the medications he was on, he would say it's for nerve damage, even though it was an antidepressant. One of them was Cymbalta that he would say, he's like, oh, I take this because for nerve damage. And it's also an antidepressant, but he's not taking that for that.
Wow. So just so much shame.
Yeah.
I mean, and it sounds like you had mentioned he has his family history, of mental health struggles. And I imagine there was probably a lot of shame in that growing up that he witnessed or felt. So
therapy was very scary back then, like I know his mother has explained what her mom had gone through for therapy. And it was really scary, some of the treatments that they had done. So going to therapy was not somewhere they wanted to do because they saw that process with the grandma. And so I feel probably older generations, that's probably still there, that fear.
I graduated in '09 with my master's in counseling. And in my first rotation at Banner Hospital, maybe I shouldn't say that, at a hospital, they were still doing electric shock therapy on the brain. I would watch them shock the lobes of the brain, and these people would come out catatonic. I mean, these treatments that are so scary are like, even though there's TMS available, there's, neurofeedback, there are so many progressive therapies that don't cause any harm, but I still see it.
Yeah, well, that's why I I want to stop that generational line. I mean, I saw the immense pain that my kids went through on that day. And I was just so mad because as a parent, you try and keep your kids safe. And I actually felt more in control staying in the relationship because I thought to myself, well, I can control where my kids are at. If we had 50-50, I wouldn't have control there. And so I felt I was being strong and protective.
Absolutely.
Me doing everything on my own gave me this like, oh, I'm so strong, and I became super hyper independent. I had my social life and I was like, well, I can do this. Once my husband died by suicide and saw that immense pain, I was so mad because I was like, wow, those children so hurt. And how am I ever gonna, I don't know, fix it. I don't like to use that word, but I just felt really lost. So I just dove into finding out all the modalities for us so then we can stop that generational line. So we have done play therapy with the kids, breath work, meditations. Actually, they really like sound bowls. I created it's right behind me, a little sacred corner where we have all the sound healing. I have emotion cards, just cold plunging. We got into that. That's been really, I see that with my daughter. She's definitely a water girl. Like swimming is very healing because even we were in Hawaii when he passed, and even us swimming in the ocean, I remember going under the water and listening to the whales, sing, and how we can almost be in a meditative zone, and then we'd pop our heads back up and we'd feel that pain again. But then we'd go underwater.
Oh,
and then we'd feel this like it was like it was giving us this energy, this love. I felt like, wow. At first I was really mad it happened in such a special place in our heart in Maui, but in the same time I'm so grateful it was in Maui because it's so beautiful and so sacred there. So I think it really helped us, give us that love that we needed at the time.
oh, like you were just held by the land and held and nurtured by the animals. That is, oh, Melissa, so bittersweet. There's no words.
Yeah, it really was. And I now wanted to change that generational line. So I've been really curious to, EMDR and neurofeedback for the kids. I even done a brain scan for Mateus with Dr. Amon's clinic, just because, I was seeing some behaviors that I'm like, oh, I just want to know what I'm early detection with anything. And I know they had come up saying that his amygdala was, kind of hyperactive. So that's the fight and flight is what they told me. And so it's still very active due to trauma and different ways to help. But as they said, nutrition, if we avoid, sugars and gluten, and certain supplements could help as well, but as well as neurofeedback and more therapy. So I'm just really trying to give them those tools now because I've heard too many stories of my friends have lost a parent at their age and how addiction played a role in their numbing as they got older.
Right.
Yeah, because they weren't given those tools, right? For all that suppression.
Oh my gosh, there's two things I want to talk about here. One is something that very few people talk about. We all know that trauma is passed down generationally.
Yes.
Not only through the experience, but through the DNA and through the cellular memory of these things that happened. But what I love is healing is also passed down through the generation, not only to our posterity, but to the generations before who never had the opportunity to heal. I was working with a client one time, and in IFS therapy, we do something called a legacy unburdening. And, the legacy means that you're unburdening not just you, but you're recognizing, oh, wow, this was my mother's pattern, and she learned that from her mother. And you imagine all the generations of men or women or both standing behind you, and you pass that burden back. Actually, this was just this week. I was working with a client who lost a loved one to suicide. And sometimes when I'm working with people who have loved ones who had passed, their loved ones will come to me and I can hear them. And in this circumstance, that's exactly what happened. And we were doing this legacy unburdening, and her deceased loved one told me she has a lake that's very special to her. Ask her about it. And I said, okay. And so I asked about that lake, and she said, yes, it's Veterans Oasis Park. My dad was a vet. That's the only place I can still feel close to him because I'm just so angry that he took his life. And she had a gray stone with a very special significance, which I won't talk about here because that's hers. But he asked her to take that gray stone and to throw it into the lake. And that as he did, he'd be behind her holding her. And he said, now here's what I want you to know. I want you to watch the ripple. He said that ripple will go out in every direction and it'll go on through infinity. And he said, as you let go of the gray stone, it'll release the heaviness in your heart. And I want you to watch that ripple go out into infinity and watch all your ancestors. They'll all be standing behind me. And not only that, your future children who will also be impacted by that ripple of your healing will be healed in that moment too. And so yesterday was the anniversary of her dad's passing, and she did just that. And I cannot wait to catch up with her to hear how all that went.
That is a beautiful story. And as you're telling me the story, I have full shivers and goosebumps because I have been asking, Scott, we still have his ashes and I feel called to release them but I don't know if my kids are ready for that or, his mom had said that could be very traumatic for them, and she preferred I'd keep them somewhere, and so I do feel they're cutting those ties as far as the traumas, and Scott was probably holding a lot on both sides of the family so he had to do a lot of generational trauma healing,
But you are such a protective factor to your children, because you're the adult and you're the parent and you're this shining example of healing. And even if all your kids do is bask in your energy and they're around you and you're healing, that transfers too. Just like all they had to do to be traumatized was live in a house with that vibration of trauma for it to be contagious. Energy is contagious. So my belief is through your example as a conscious parent, as a loving mother, as someone who's doing her own healing work, that's the greatest protective factor of all, because you take that burden from them and you get to resolve it through all space and time. It's not linear, and so you create that ripple in their lives and they get to reap all those benefits.
I love that you mentioned that because actually it was at the hospital because Scott, he attempted suicide on March 10th, and then he didn't pass in March 13th. So I had met with the organ donor specialist, and I was frantic to meet with a specialist for the kids, a therapist, before we flew back. We lived in Wasilla, Alaska. Before we would fly back, coming back into our home and leaving without Scott, there was just, but he said, you need the therapy first because your kids will co-regulate with you and watch you grieve and heal. So I ended up finding a therapist and starting with them. And he was absolutely right. The more I was regulated, the more I was doing the work, then I could be so present for their grief, be able to answer the question. I had a lot of really hard questions to answer. And I felt so lost, especially with my daughter. She would get very angry and really wanted to know the how. How dad, for me, I called it a brain illness. They do know the word suicide, and that was my own personal choice to speak it. So, they were there that day, and that's what a lot of the counselors had recommended, or even at the hospital, just to kind of tell the truth and call it a brain illness. But still, they had so many questions, especially my daughter, as to how, and I felt so complex in telling her, I'm like, oh gosh, she's so young, being 8 and be too much. But I realized that she was creating worse stories in her mind.
Wow. Yes.
She was really creating those. And once I was able to kind of I don't know, it was so hard, but I had to really go with my own intuition. And once I was able to let her know, it was almost like a weight was released, and she just needed to know that she could trust me. And our relationship was more bonded. And and since then, because if not, there was this friction between us, and she wanted the truth. So I felt like that just grew, or else I feel kids will create these visions, these war stories. And so that's what I, incorporated. And now with the kids, I feel I've been so lucky. They are thriving. They are doing great. This will be on Monday, will be 3 years. But I'm still searching, that's why I love what you do, as you're kind of more to the root cause as far as treatments, because I've now dove into that myself as far as getting curious about microdosing and psilocybin. And, I've been curious I have a friend who owns a ketamine clinic, so I know that's been really healing for some, and ayahuasca. So I've been really curious about how you do provide treatment as well.
Yeah, to me, healing happens through consciousness. The beliefs that we have, these old patterns that are picked up through generations, are just constructs that are passed down. And gosh, I was meditating this morning and something came to me today. Maybe this is the place to share it. I made myself, do you ever just do voice notes like on your phone and you're like, I don't have a lot of time right now, but I'm going to sit with that later. It was one of those things. So I hope I can remember it, but it was something about, oh my gosh, this is what it was. So it was like, what if God put psychedelics on our planet, psilocybin, ayahuasca, right? These medicinal plants on our planet, so that we could commune with him, and so that we could remember our power, and so that we could remember our gifts and our strengths. And what if, just like the leaders that burned the books, abolished these medicines so that we would forget? And I think that these medicines are here to help us remember. And what my meditation told me today was that each cell in your body carries DNA, right? There is a double helix DNA cell in every strand of your body. And what I was shown this morning in my meditation was that when you have trauma, right, it creates a neural peptide, which is like this inflammatory response to trauma that gets stuck on the cell that's associated with the trauma. So we feel a heaviness in our heart. We feel panic in our stomach, and those are those neural peptides. But when we heal the neural peptides, that cell opens up and it unlocks. And when it unlocks, we've all had trauma processing, voluntary or involuntarily. Sometimes the memories just come up, but it unlocks memories. The neural peptide releases all the emotion that was experienced when we had that trauma. But then on the other side of that, it unlocks the DNA. And when we unlock the DNA, we remember like our ancestors and their pain, and we can remember like our ancient roots and our spiritual technologies that are on the other side of this trauma. And I was just watching the evolution of the cell this morning in my meditation, the evolution of the DNA and how they're all connected to plant medicines. And I was like,
wow, I didn't have that in my meditation this morning. I could really resonate with that because now I'm breathwork facilitator. And because for me as a tool for my healing, that's how I was able to reconnect and remember my soul purpose, remember what I'm here to do. And also actually one really powerful, I've had several powerful breathwork sessions. And one of them, the vision, because I found Scott, and provided the CPR and all that. And so I remember actually even before going into the room, I asked God to protect me for whatever I was going to see. That was like before I went in, that's what I called out to. But, that vision did bother me for almost a year. But with breath work, I still remember that vision came straight on. It's like God's like, here we go. But now time to let it go. And since then, it like drew it out. It had never bothered me ever again. And I've had just recently in January through the breathwork session in big, big, big letters. And I know Scott came because my mom saw him and she was right next to me doing breathwork. And it was big letters. It said boundaries. Like I'm working on that, even from my children, like my daughter's my teacher as well for boundaries. And so was Scott. And so I always say that now as a breathwork facilitator is reconnecting to yourself, remembering
that word, Melissa. I swear, like we forget nothing. There are we sometimes feel like, oh, all this time, I don't remember. You totally do. It is encoded in your cells, encoded in your DNA. And I think trauma just fractures us and makes us forget. And I'll be honest, like for me, psychedelics changed my life, but so did breathwork. And for me, breathwork even more so, because it's really easy to have a powerful experience of your own consciousness and be like, well, that was because I took a medicine. But with breathwork, you're the medicine. And in all plant work, even with plants, you're the medicine, but people attribute it very quickly to the plant. That's not it. It's consciousness. And I felt like breath work was even more empowering and more impactful for me because it was my breath that went into the cell of every part of my body and unlocked these secrets, right? To help us remember and to talk to God and to commune with the divine. I'd love to talk about like your work as a facilitator and just if you want to, because some people listening probably are like, what's breath work? So if you want to share a little bit about what is breath work, how does all that work? I'd love to hear more.
I'd love to share. Well, I would say it's such a gift and something you can carry with you and you can become your own healer, right? Because you've got your breath, you can carry any to point. So breath work, for me, the session I guide people through for an hour, the first 30 minutes is putting yourself in a stressful state. So activating the sympathetic nervous system. So it's really breathing only through the mouth. So you'd be breathing in through the mouth and out through the mouth. And you're just kind of activating the stressors because that's where you're trying to express anything that might have been trapped trauma. I even like to put a little bit of pressure on the stomach. Like for me, that's where I think my first chronic signs of me just repressing and suppressing was in the gut from acid reflux and whatnot. So while people are doing the breath work and trying to express, sometimes there's resistance. I find some people either sometimes get a tetany where their hands kind of buckle up or they'll move up and there's some resistance. So I tend to kind of press on the lower stomach and to help release anything that's trapped and see if anything that's coming up. So it's really putting that body and that sympathetic nervous system is activated. Now, the last 30 minutes is the parasympathetic. So more of the calming down, and how we do that is through the nose only, breathing in and out. And it helps your body just feel safe and calm. And I always tell people too, to visualize, that breath coming in. Picture it, all those dust or the glitter, gold glitter coming into each cell because you're bringing in that oxygen to each cell. Most of the time, we're breathing just on the, top of the diaphragm. We're really not expanding much, but we want to bring that breath to each cell of the body where you can heal. If you have some pain, you bring healing to it. And so I found it very powerful just by using different breath techniques. I mean, there's several kinds that I'm still learning, expanding my knowledge as well. I've just joined Jeremy Moodick's Breathwork Resurrect course as well. I initially trained with Jaggers and Fish, the Somatic IQ in Austin, and that was an incredible group of people. I mean, when I went there to take my course, first is online and then you go live, there was 52 of us in Austin, and that room of people and their stories, why they got into breath work. Some of them were cancer survivors, some were, previously addicts, and breath work really helped them to reconnect on top of other things. A lot of them was, plant medicine, but it was just something else they wanted to bring in and healing into others. So
I think it's one of the most profound tools I've personally experienced. And I've experienced a lot of things. Being a therapist, I do sample everything that I am trained in. I am a student of, or I am a client of, so I can have those experiences and I do EMDR, I can do IFS, I can do a lot of things, but for me, breath work, it's so somatic. I want to go back to something you said because you talked about tetany. Holy cow, Melissa, the first time I tried breath work, I was in like one of the darkest places of my life. My legs, my hips, my lobster claw hands. I mean, it is no joke. Like when you are carrying so much stress and so much tension and so much trauma, what gets activated in you, you can literally feel which chakra, in my opinion, which energy center your trauma is stored in through breath work. You're like, oh, hey, like my solar plexus, I feel you. Oh, you too, sacral. I mean, it's like mind-blowing stuff. It's not like when you're sitting in your therapist's office, like, let's try some square breathing. No, like this is like the drums are playing. There's like, this intense music and like this kind of like, it feels like a Native American spirit in the room. And they're just like, we're going to like rattle the demons out of you.
Yes, exactly. I mean, my first group session that I went to is once I moved here to Arizona. Gosh, I was kind of caught off guard. I think because people were expressing anger, like screaming, yelling, and some were crying and some were joy, some laughed and the pure joy. But yeah, I always say it's a safe place to express those emotions. If there are trapped anger that you weren't ever safe to express, or knew how to in a safe manner, that's a great way to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
Because
yeah, it is intense and so powerful. My technique when I facilitate breath work with clients, it's very similar to yours, which is like really intense for 30 minutes, activating. They call it like masculine, where it's like expression and like toning or, using your voice to get some of the energy out. And then the last half, like when they're in parasympathetic, they'll call that like the feminine, because now you're in a place, now that you've like gotten the trauma out of the way, released some of the blocks, now you're open to receive. And that's when the divine feminine comes in and offers you guidance and visions and all those beautiful things.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, it's just been a powerful aspect in my healing, and I'm trying, use it. I'm trying to incorporate for my kids. An hour session is a little long for them, but just here and there, actually, where I've been able to incorporate it with them is when we cold plunge, because then they can really, as they're going into that water, use their breath to tell their mind that they're safe in this water. And it also builds that resiliency, and I always tell them they can let go of something in the water. And so they've really enjoyed doing that. And actually, a couple of weekends ago, I co-facilitated my first retreat in Sedona with a wonderful dentist. Her name is Dr. Delphine. And it was other dentists and a dental student as well, because we're trying to kind of bring this awareness in the dental community. Since I'm a dental hygienist, Scott was a dentist, and I feel there's so much in the logic, but it's a profession where you talk about the solar plexus. I truly feel people come in and there's a lot of trauma that they bring in, and there's a lot of fear in the dental practice. And so they're sitting right here, your solar plexus, and you're taking on all that fear and all that anger. And because a lot of times people will come into the office and they'd be angry at us, but it's really just fear, and you hold that space for them. So I feel dentists and anyone in the dental community, it's a good way to express what you're holding on from all your patients. And so I was able to guide a dentist we went to Oak Creek to cold plunge, and it was her first time. And of course that fight and flight kicks in right away when you're in the water. So I was just kind of holding her hand and guiding her in her breath. And I love that tip point where she shifted, where her body.
What does that look like?
She was just kind of hyperventilating, really like that breathing on, just using the kind of the panic breath. And then finally I was like, you just kind of with in through the nose and out through the nose. And I was just doing it until she was just following my breath. And then she was able to just kind of drop in the water and stay there. And she was able to calm down. She was able to stay in the water. And actually it was fantastic because I saw that shift. And then when I was like, okay, we've been in the water for like 5 minutes or so. So I get out because it was pretty cold.
Yeah. Oh, you're in there with her.
Yeah, I'm in there with her in the Oak Creek Canyon in Sedona. And then she's like, she could stay longer. She was just like, and then, and then you get the kick of serotonin afterwards, right? You just, it's boost all the dopamines and serotonin after all of that. And I feel like that's why that's a cold plunging, a cold therapy. I still remember after everything happened, I have a good friend in Sweden, and she kept on going, you need to start cold plunging. And I was like, oh no, I don't like the cold. But once I actually moved to Arizona and started going to reconnect, I went on a regular basis, and I saw how I was able to, because my body was so overwhelmed. I was definitely on fight and flight for so long, but I knew I couldn't survive staying like that for a year plus, I'd end up getting sick. So it just built that resiliency by being consistent with that. Because for me, if I didn't do any of the work, I started showing signs of acid reflux, being diagnosed with a hypothyroidism, because all that suppression was causing chronic illness, inflammation in my body. Cyst was showing up. I had my first cyst was an MRI on my breast. And actually, that's what brought me to Arizona for the first time.
Now, this was after Scott passed, when all these health issues?
No, this is before, actually.
Wow.
Before, because we were suppressing so much and hiding, and I wasn't using my voice, and because it was just progressing so much with Scott, and I just didn't know what to do anymore. So I just kept it in. And my first sign was the gut health. I remember going to see an ENT and he's like, oh, you have GERD. And I'm like, I have GERD. I work out like 4 or 5 days a week. I eat organic, I eat really well. It just didn't make sense. All this acid reflux. And then I get a breast MRI and I had a cyst on a breast, and I didn't want to go to any specialists in Alaska. So I flew down to Arizona actually for treatment. And luckily it was benign. And, but within that same year, I then got a cyst on my vocal cord. I started sounding like a smoker, and it tied in with my hormones and everything as well. But finally I saw a second ENT in Anchorage, and they had done an endoscope where they put a camera down your nose and look your throat, and they found a cyst on the vocal cord. And the ENT said only motivational speakers or singers normally get this. He had never seen this in Alaska. And I said, well, I'm neither. I rarely use my voice. I'm a dental hygienist, and that was it. Well, that same year, I had to get a surgery. Now, out of that surgery, I couldn't talk or use my voice for 4 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
So, and I had, my kids were really young. So Mateus was, 3 or 4. I don't know. He was young, and so he couldn't read. And then Sophia is just starting to read. So I had a whiteboard and I'd write on there. And because my husband was still just not emotionally available. So I still had to be so on and taking care of the kids. And I'd use a voice activator on my phone to communicate with my son. And I had to spend a lot of time within. It's like God gives you those signs sometimes when you're not listening to those other whispers. He's like, I'm going to give you one where you have a choice. I couldn't speak. I couldn't talk. I had to really go within. And then I was like, oh, God is telling me to use my voice.
Wow, Melissa.
Yeah. So that
God
was
whispers and then he yells, right? If you don't get the message.
Yes, he will yell. And then I was like, okay, I started using more of my voice. This was 2 years before my husband passed. And I did start kind of almost showing more boundaries with my husband, saying, okay, these meds, like, they're not being of service to you. We need help. And starting to speak to family members close to him, friends, we lived in a very small town in Wasilla, Alaska, and had a really great dental practice. I also didn't want to tell the whole town. But I did start using my voice and listening to those signs more. I'm definitely now more following my intuition. I feel like that's what I'm constantly doing, my morning meditations, to hear my guidance. Like, what am I supposed to do today? Now I've written my book. I do breath work. I know I want to speak more and share my message. I'm speaking at a dental conference here in May to share my story and bring awareness, ultimately because I don't want people to wait till they'll get those strong whispers where they get sick and it's nothing reversible, and
Absolutely.
I just don't want it to go that route where Scott did, right? So it's all about preventative, and how we do that is bring awareness.
Absolutely. And it's so beautiful that, those are some hard times. Those are some dark moments, that you've endured and experienced. And in hindsight, it's like God was there. He was there the whole time, even in the darkness. Could you see it then? Or is it only clear now?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my faith, I feel, even grew more so, leading up to his death. Now, gosh, God was there all along. I was getting all these signs, almost like he was prepping me. Like he knew what was coming ahead. And you talk about dark energies. I felt that. Very, very, very strongly with Scott. It was almost scary for me to lay down next to him. I mean, he had his own separate room anyways, but me going into that room was really hard. And I know my son was the same. I know he had a hard time going in that space. So I felt that darkness, and I felt it the day he died by suicide as well, because it was such a shift from the day before. And I was like, whoa, it was really dark. And I was like, I remember getting ready and going, oh, I should go lay down. But there was something inside me going, no, and so I started really listening to those signs, and there was so much. Okay. So even on that day, I'm sitting on the beach watching my kids swim, and Scott had said he was going to go do jujitsu. But I felt called. There was this wave that passed me to say, grab my phone and text Scott. So I did. I texted him, I love you and thank you for the beautiful day yesterday. But that's when he texts back, don't come up, send security. But if God or my angels never gave me that wave, I always think about maybe we would have gone back to the continent. He wouldn't have messaged us. You know what my kids have seen, like God was there all along to protect us and guiding me. I mean, I know all the prayers. That's why I always say like prayer warriors. I mean, there's power to that because I know luckily for us, we have huge community of friends that came and gathered and said they were praying. And because people will look back like, how did you get back up? And just, I had to deal with a lawsuit, judges becoming now doing payroll for the office, making sure I'm hiring another dentist so we keep it afloat so I can sell it. And so I just stepped in these roles, but still being there for my kids. It was just really overwhelming. And people are like, how did you do it? I know all the prayers and God was right there to show me the strength. And there were people showing up and asking for help. I just had to get really comfortable or uncomfortable asking for help, and God was there. I mean, and there's so much little things too that happened with Scott. Even the day and night he passed, we couldn't sleep, and I have both kids in my arms. And Scott, I know he came for a great big hug for the kids, and like literally, Sophia stood up and gave him a hug. I mean, I know God was even the house when I moved. People were saying, "Don't move for a year, stay in Alaska, keep everything the same," but I didn't want to stay. We live very isolated, no need, 50 acres, and it's really dark, 8 months of winter in Alaska. I knew personally this would not be good for me. Yeah. I could easily hide and just drink it, every day, and nobody would know. And I feel God made it easy. Within months of him passing, somebody literally walked on my property and say, "Hey, would you be open to selling it as is?" Because that seems so overwhelming for me to list it and do all the work because we've had it for so long. And there was definitely all these stepping stones where I know he was there. He's still there. I mean, I have signs, these miracles that happen nonstop from finding my home here in Arizona. The school that I found, I knew touring the school. I'm like, oh, my kids will go here. But then the guy says, oh, no, there's 3 years waiting list. But then they get in. There was just so many miracles that I'm like, oh, my gosh.
That's incredible. Wow.
So I'm definitely very guided, and I always try to make sure I am meditating, praying, and asking for guidance because I know God will always give me the guidance to where do I go from now. And that's how I channeled my book as well. I mean, of course, I had written, in my journal and my story, but I loved how I even pivoted. In my book, I talk about divisiveness and how I've traveled the world and how sometimes there's such judgment and divisiveness in different cultures, religions, things like that. But I truly feel that God wouldn't want it that way, love for all. Wow. So yeah, I even went into that.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So what would you tell people, survivors who are maybe in the thick of it? They're in that fight, flight, lost, like a tidal wave, right? Has just kind of washed over. What's that first step? How do you get out of that?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. And it's so hard because everyone just grieves differently. And I would never want someone to be like, this is what she do. That's the right way. But for me, the best advice was to start taking care of me, like find some space to heal. That first step, like truly just find that first step as far as like healing, like seek out either a professional counselor, seek out some EMDR, seek out time to do breath work or that first step to just take care of you first, especially if they have children. Sometimes we kind of step into that mode. We need to make sure they're okay and run out of time for ourselves, because we're so busy with work and house duties and the kids. But even when I was in Alaska, it was really hard to find therapists and they were waitlisted. And so I actually just started with podcasts, listening to meditation and breath work sessions there. And not really until I arrived I did do some Zoom counseling. I do remember he was this great healer. I mean, probably an angel. I mean, I don't even know where he's at now, but he was in Honolulu. And yeah, they had referred me in Maui to this gentleman, and he's the one who guided me through this 10-minute breathwork session the day after Scott had passed. And I remember I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was having a heart attack. And he guided me through 10 minutes of a breathwork session. And I was like, oh my gosh, I felt this peace. And I still have the email to tell him, oh my gosh, I felt God. Like, I want that more, you know?
Yes.
And so I know I continued with him, but for a little while. And I can't even find him now. Like, it's so strange. I'm like, maybe he was this angel.
Maybe. But you were literally so incredibly guided. My hope for the listeners today is that they can reflect on your story and start to see sentiments and echoes of that guidance in their own life. Because I know so often we feel so alone when we're going through something that not many people can relate to because they haven't had that experience. But we're never alone. And we're so loved. And your story makes that so beautifully evident.
Thank you. Yeah, we are so loved. We are. And I love that you say not alone, because actually my podcast, that's what I called it.
Yes.
Not alone, because we are not alone. And there's people out there like us, you know, there you can reach out to and listen to our stories and what you provide. I mean, with your clinical background and counseling and experiences as well.
Thank you. Melissa, if people wanted to work with you, how would they find you? What's the best way to reach out?
Yes, well, I have my website, which is melissagratitude.life, and also on social media, on Instagram at Melissa_gratitude. And then my podcast is Not Alone with Melissa-Sue Methven on Apple and Spotify.
Awesome. And her book is live on Amazon, you guys. So if you want to hear more about her amazing story and her journey, I highly, highly recommend getting on. It's on Audible too.
It's Audible.
So if you're like me,
recorded in my own voice.
Yeah. Oh, that's seriously, those are my favorite audibles. Like, I love it when authors record their own book because you can hear where they want to put like the emphasis and like you can hear their emotion in it. Cause I don't know. Those are my favorite audibles.
Well, thank you. It's been such an honor. I feel we could talk forever.
Yes. Well, thanks so much for being on. Listeners, if you feel like somebody could benefit from hearing Melissa's story, if you have somebody who's going through a similar experience, who feels like they're just in the darkness and they need help, they need a light in the darkness, please share this with them because Melissa's here to save lives, and that's for sure. So Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Goodbye.